Welcome. It is I, Mike V. Today's poker strategy lesson is how much should you bet or raise in No Limit Texas Hold'em? Before we begin, if you are new to Texas Hold'em poker and you have not read up on the rules yet, I do have a tutorial video that I will link right up on the top. Go ahead and check out that video first before you watch this one. But for everyone else, assuming you already know how to play the basic rules of the game, let's continue. So this video, like I said at the beginning of the video, is that this will be a lesson on how much you should bet or raise. So we're not going to discuss too much on when you should bet, but we're going to discuss how much you should bet when you do bet. So let's get started. So as mentioned here, we're going to go through the bullet points. Today we will discuss how much to bet in No Limit Texas Hold'em. One of the most important things, especially if you are a beginner, do not vary your bet based on the strength of your hand, as you'll see. The following advice is a general guideline. You should adjust based on the action of your table. We're going to go through an example as we go down, but as we go down the list. But this is going to be a general starting guideline. As with anything in poker, uh, you should follow a specific set of rules and then adjust based on the action at your table. All right, we're going to start with pre-flop. So the first two hole cards are dealt. And if it's folded around to you and you'd like to raise, this is pretty much the general guideline I use in most circumstances, is to make it 3 times the big blind or 3 big blinds. So you raise 3 times to 3 times the minimum bet. So if you're playing a $1, $2 cash game, for example, $2 is the big blind and it's the minimum bet, and you want to raise, you put out $6. If you're playing a tournament and the blinds of that tournament are 50 and 100, and you want to raise and it's folded to you, then you make it 300, 3 times the big blind in that case. So this assumes that either you're first to act or you're first to put money in voluntarily. So it's folded around to you in this example. Then you make it 3 times. Now, if there are players that limped, which is to say they've called the big blind before it got to your turn, and you want to raise, you're going to have to make a slightly bigger bet. In this case, you're going to raise to 3 big blinds plus 1 big blind for every limper. So in that same $1, $2 blind cash game, let's say one person called the big blind, put in $2 in before it got to you, and you want to raise. 3 times a big blind is $6 plus an additional big blind or additional $2 for every limper in front of you. There was one, so you make it $8 in that case. Now, if a player already raised before your turn, then a general guideline is to raise roughly 3 to 4 times that player's raise. So in the example of the 1-2 No Limit Hold'em cash game again, so it's $1, $2 blinds, and before it got to your turn, one player made it $6. They did it 3x big blind raise as well, and you want to re-raise. You want to make a 3-bet. $18 to $24 would be a typical amount in that example. So these first 3 bullet points are, I would say, pretty standard if you're playing an online cash game. Or the early and mid stages of most types of tournaments, whether live or online. This is a good guideline to start off with. Now, I will add a couple of exceptions here. If you are in the later stages of a tournament, you can get away with a lower raise amount, which is what I do too, especially as we get closer to the bubble and then past it. I would usually go about 2.2 to 2.5 big blinds for the initial raise. And in the case of really shallow stacks, or if you're at the final table where you're playing heads up and the stacks are shallow, A minimum raise, a min raise, or just double the big blind, 2 big blinds would be sufficient in that case. The other exception is if you are playing a live cash game. So if you're playing a cash game at your local casino or your local card room, physical cash game as opposed to online, um, it is common for initial raise amounts to be bigger and for many more hands to go to a flop. This is pretty typical in a low stakes cash game like a 1-2 or 1-3 blind no limit hold'em game. And you might need to raise bigger, not just in order to thin the field and get folks to fold, but also for value. If you got a good hand, you want and if people are calling bigger raises, then you can raise bigger. So an example would be about 5 big blinds in the live cash games. So if you're playing $1, $2 blind, a $10 raise, initial raise, or 1-3, maybe a $15 initial raise. As mentioned at the very top of the list here, uh, you should adjust based on the action at your table. So if you're going to a card room and you're playing a live cash game, watch the action, see what people are doing, see how much people are raising to, and how many people are calling that raise, and if they call it often. And then you can make your decision there if you need to make it a higher raise. But ultimately, once you decide on the amount you want to raise, whether it's the standard amount that I offer here or a different amount based on your judgment, you should keep to that. As mentioned at the very top of the list here, don't vary your bet based on the strength of your hand. They'll give away your hand easily to people who pay attention, of course. All right, let's head over to the flop. Or, yeah, post flop. So the first 3 community cards are dealt. And if you raised pre-flop, much of the time the players will check to you expecting a continuation bet, also called a C-bet. So let's assume that happens and you want to make a continuation bet. You raise pre-flop and you want to continue betting on the flop. The amount you bet may depend on the texture of the board. But generally speaking, a continue bet range could be anywhere from as little as 30% of the current size of the pot to as much as 75% of the pot. A couple of examples of you would bet on the low end of that range. So, for example, like I mentioned, 30% of the pot would say, let's say the pot is on the, let's say you get to the flop and the pot is, you're playing a 1-2 cash game. Let's say it's $50, which would be pretty big to be honest. But let's just say $50 in the pot, and you want to bet a third of it, 33%. That's going to be, what, 15, 16, $17. Let's just say, or 75% is $37. So that would be a range there. So on the flop with few draws, so a dry board such as King 8 Deuce, with no possible flush, King 8 Deuce Rainbow, let's just say, a low continuation bet is usually sufficient. I like to do 33% of the pot in these instances. That's what I typically do. On the other hand, draw heavy flops. Let's say the board is Queen 10-8 with 2 diamonds. You may need a higher continuation bet to defend your hand against draws. Now, importantly, though, I have another bullet point here. Take into account your current hand, your perceived range, and the perceived range that you may have based on your raise pre-flop, and your opponent's likely range of possible hands as well. So you got to take a lot of these into account. For example, a hand where you would want to make a higher continuation bet on a flop, such as Queen 10-8 with 2 diamonds, would be, say, if you flopped 3 of a kind. If you flopped a set, let's say you had pocket queens or pocket tens, a higher continuation bet here would make it so that anybody who's drawing to a flush or a straight would have to pay more to draw. And you'll also might get inferior hands like ace queen or king queen to call you, which you beat. It's another reason in this case to increase the size of your continuation bet in this example. On the other hand, if you have a hand that has a weak draw or it's mostly missed, you may not even want to make a continuation bet at all. This is a draw heavy board, as previously mentioned. Let's say you have ace nine of spades, and you've got queen 10 8 on the flop with two diamonds and no spade. You have an inside straight draw. You need a jack to complete it, and even then, it may not even be good if there's a lot of betting and raising going on. So in that case, you could just avoid this continuation bet entirely because you will most likely get called or even raised in that type of board, especially if a lot of players are seeing the flop. They called pre-flop and got to see that board. On the other hand, if you have the same ace nine on the dry board with king eight deuce, you can make a low C bet as a bluff, and more likely than not, just take down the pot right then and there. All right, so as mentioned, once again, you do not want to vary your bet based on the strength of your hand. So I gave you a couple examples right there with those two boards on why you would bet and why you would not bet. And notice how it's neither based on the strength of your hand, but rather the board texture. You have to look into a lot of things. Your hand, of course, is important too, but as mentioned here, your likely range and what your opponents are likely to have on that board as well. Takes a lot of practice, of course. And then the above guidelines also apply to the other round. So on the turn in river, you can refer to this paragraph right here as well on not only whether or not you should bet, but also how much to bet. So I do want to finally mention here at the very bottom here, overbetting the pot. You may see this happen occasionally. It's not that common. You may see someone new to the game do it because they don't know proper bet sizing, but if you see a regular person do this, it usually indicates a polarized range. So if someone bets more than the size of the pot, let's say the pot is $70 and somebody puts in $100 in, they raise $100, more than the size of the pot. That's usually an indication of a polarized range, which means they have a really strong or unbeatable hand, or they're bluffing, and it's a pure bluff. Not even a draw can save them, which is known as having nuts or air. But that's pretty much it for this video on how much you should bet or raise. So this pretty much scratches the surface on betting in No Limit Hold'em, and there's a lot more that I could talk about, but I want to keep this video as short as I possibly can, while having enough information that you'll learn something. And if you did learn something, please let me know with a like. And if you have any questions, definitely put it in the comment section. And if you enjoyed the video, like, comment, subscribe, share the video, and hit the bell icon to be notified when I release my next video. And I'll see you later on for the next one. Have a good day, and go make it happen.